Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Today I have some decorated sugar cookies here for you. I'm getting ready for the holidays here in Western Canada with my company Sugar Bee Cookies, and I wanted to show you guys how to pipe snowflake cookies like a rock star so that you can do it at home for yourself. I'll talk a little bit about the icing and a couple of different piping tips and tricks that you can do to create this look. We are working on a base cookie today. I have glazed these, so all I've done is thin down some royal icing, and you can either dip it and flip it over and let it all settle, or you can paint it on with a synthetic paintbrush that has never been used for anything else other than for food purposes. So it's okay if you work on a bare cookie. I just have a collection that these are a rustic sort of look that I'm going for, so I glazed them. The piping bag I'm using is just a tipless piping bag, and you can get these off of Amazon and most food supply stores these days. They're quite common and quite popular. I'm also going to show you how you can do this with just a Ziploc bag. This is a cute little fun holiday one I have. So I will show you how to do that in case you don't have access to any piping bags. The first thing we need to talk about is the royal icing. So royal icing, when it comes off a mixer, is very thick. Try not to spill it like me. It's very, very thick. And you could pipe with this easily to get this kind of piping technique, but this is going to probably hurt your hands with all the squeezing. So what I'm going to do is just thin it down a little bit and show you what I'm looking for. You want to take just a little bit of water at a time. So I always have mine in just a little squirt bottle here. And this is just a small amount of icing, but this will get you quite a few cookies in this technique. And I'm literally adding just maybe 1/3 of a teaspoon. Icing and sugar react very, very easily and quickly to water, so always best to do just a few drops and go back and do more if you need to. Give that a good stir up. And you can see it's starting to have a little bit more of a melt. It's leveling itself just a tiny little bit. We want just a tiny little bit more than that. What we're looking for is called a piping consistency icing, and that's generally like a 20 to 25 second heal time. And what that means is when your icing rests and levels itself out, the heal time is when you score the top of your icing, how long it takes for that wound to heal itself. You'll get comfortable with it the more you work with icing. So this is just a quick trick for anybody that just wants to work with it for the holidays. Basically, we're looking for about a toothpaste consistency. So it's soft, but it kind of holds a little bit of a shape. And that's what you're looking for. I always keep a paper towel or cloth at hand, and I'm going to show you how to cut your piping bag. We want just a basic cut in it, but we want to take off a fairly small nick in it. Whenever you're cutting a piping bag, you'll be surprised how big the hole actually is for piping when you've taken just a small amount off. So always go, again, kind of like with the water and the icing, always go less and cut off more if you need to. I'm going to get closer to the camera, and hopefully you can see this, but you can see I'm pinching it between my fingers, and I'm taking off just the smallest amount. This technique is fairly forgiving. I'm just going to cut a piece of parchment. This technique is fairly forgiving, so you don't need a super fine piping. hole, but just to give you an idea, see that one's a little fine, my line broke. That's a little fine, but when I squeeze, I'm gonna get a good blob. You can go a little bit thicker than that, which I think I will. Oops, icing is squeezing out here. Make a mess. That's what I'm good at. Watch where your little plastic piece goes as well, because if you're working with decorated cookies, you don't want it to fall into those cookies. Okay, my line is quite a bit thicker now. So that's what we're looking for. I'm going to get a different piece of parchment paper here, and I'm just going to show you some basic piping techniques. When you hold your piping bag, you want to hold it with the thickest part in your hand, in your palm, and you'll want to get comfortable with holding your wrist with your other hand or holding the piping bag, or both. If you can get comfortable with that sooner than later, you'll have greater control in your piping. You will find that I'm going to probably pull back from not doing that just so I can show you a camera angle. When you pipe, you want to squeeze just a tiny little bit out, touch the surface, and you want to start squeezing consistently, and you actually want to lift up and let the icing fall into place. So just attach, squeeze, lift, let it fall into place. I broke my line there, and then touch back down. So attach, lift, touch down, and release your pressure. That's how you get nice clean lines. It seems counterintuitive to do that lift. Most people want to draw right on the surface, and you can see you don't get consistency. You're going to get broken lines. You're going to get sort of globby lines, and it doesn't give you time to correct any issues. So when you lift, you have time to kind of put it back into place. You can see I did quite the wiggle there, and my line is still fairly straight. So get comfortable with that. You can work with a couple of shapes if you want to. You can try around. See how high I'm lifting? It gives me control. If I tried to do a round really close to the surface, it's okay, but it was really wonky, and actually I don't have as much control. So that's the basic of that. Now I want to show you guys how to do this technique. What this is kind of a mix between a teardrop and almost like a knit technique. So when we're piping dots, you're actually going to want to be more upright. When you're piping lines, you're more on an angle, kind of like a writing utensil. Piping dots, you're a little more upright, and you're going to just squeeze until you get the desired size dot. You're actually squeezing and letting the icing come up to the tip. You're not moving the piping bag. You're just above the surface, and you're squeezing and releasing to get the size dot that you want. Tiny dots are just barely touching the surface, and you can take a toothpick if you have any peaks, or a scribe tool if you have one, but a toothpick works, and just tap the top anywhere that you have a little peak that you don't like. A teardrop is piping a dot and pulling down so that you get that tail on it. And you're piping and squeezing, and then still squeezing and pulling down, and then releasing. And if you don't like the shape of that, you can take your toothpick again. I've got yellow icing on my scribe tool. You can take your toothpick and you can pull down through to the point, and that wound should heal itself, but you can always just tap it out. If your icing is at that right consistency, it should level itself a little bit. You want about 20 seconds, 20-second piping, icing. So all this is a bunch of those. So before we get to the cookie, I'm just wiping off the tip in between. Before we get to the cookie, I'm just piping a guideline for myself. And on that guideline, I'm just squeezing and pulling down. And then I'm picking another spot and squeezing and pulling back to that line. And you can see all of a sudden we have snowflake arms. So practice on a wipeable surface or a piece of parchment or wax paper. We'll get to the cookie in a minute. I just want to show those of you that don't have an icing bag how you can use a Ziploc bag. So we're going to use the corner of the Ziploc bag. So we want to put our icing into there. And you'll want a decent amount when you're filling a piping bag, but that's about as full as you want to go. Any fuller, you can get really big piping bags. I think this one's only a 10-inch. 12-inch is the most common. You can also get a 14-inch one. I would suggest don't fill them to the capacity. You only want it about, you know, not even a hand length. So whatever hand length you have, that's about what your capacity for holding will be because of your palm. You want to make sure that you have something that's not too full because your hands will start to ache. Okay, so we have icing in a bag, and you'll want to go ahead and just seal that up, but you want all the air out of it. And then you want to squeeze all your icing down into the corner there. Now, this isn't the ideal way to pipe. This is just a cheater's way to pipe. That's not the right words I want to use. This is just a quick trick. You could also make yourself a parchment cone if you're comfortable with that. And if you can tie an elastic or a twist band around that, that would be great. I'm going to see if I have enough room to tie this. I don't in a knot. So make sure that you have a twist tie or something. And then the same premise goes. You'll want to cut just the tiniest little bit off your bag. And that's not quite enough. If your icing is curling or you have to squeeze harder to get it out, it's either the wrong consistency, it's too thick, or your hole in your bag is not big enough. You shouldn't struggle to squeeze it out. There you go. So you can use a Ziploc bag. You can see I can do all the same, all the same techniques. It might be just a little messier. And if you have a bit of a mess, you can always take your toothpick and draw sort of in between your marks to clean them up. So there you go. Let's pipe a snowflake. I have icing everywhere now, but that's okay. All right, so this is just a general snowflake shape. You can use any snowflake shape that you want. The premise will be the same. And the way I do it is I actually start from one end to the other for guide marks. So I create myself a line. You can start from the top if that's easier for you. If the line breaks, don't worry about it. You can go back in and you can add a little bit more, or we can just pipe over top of it as we're doing these. And I generally only do one at a time. I don't go doing them all because I don't want them to dry out too much. I'm going to start from the top of an arm, squeeze one of those, and I will just say, I'm just looking for another cloth. But I'm trying to do this at a really funny angle because of the camera and trying to make sure that you have a view. So just take your time. But I'll try and do this as cleanly as I can. And if you need to make yourself guide marks, you can. It's not needed. But visually, it might help you for your placement. And you can see I just swooped those back into my guide line. You can add more arms, but quite often I'll just do the tops and work my way around the cookie. And then I'll see where my placement is. Squeeze and pull, and I'm releasing at the end of the pull. Squeeze and release. Squeeze and release. And use your toothpick or anything to tap out any of those peaks that happened. Once you have one guide mark, you can just work. You don't have to go right across the whole cookie. You just wanted to get that general placement. Squeeze, release. Squeeze, release. Squeeze, pull, release. Make sure as you're turning your cookie that you don't muck it up. Squeeze, release, squeeze, pull down to the line and release. And you'll find you'll get very zen about this. Now you can see I'm not quite meeting up in the middle quite right, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to do a detail in the middle later. If you don't like your cookie along the way, just keep going and then go see what you can add to it to hide any areas you don't like. Don't worry about scraping it in between. Just keep going. All right, so squeezing, pulling down and releasing. And you can see sometimes I'm slightly dragging the tip of my icing through, or tip of my bag through my icing, and that's fine. You just don't want to drag it too much because you're going to end up dragging onto the cookie, and I'll see if I can explain. You know, and you break your line a bit. So if that happens, just go back in and use the tip or your toothpick to fix it and draw it back down, or just add a little bit more icing and finish it up. And you already have a base snowflake that's absolutely beautiful. So now that I've gone around and I can see how much I've piped on each arm, now I can see that I have a little bit of room to do smaller ones. And so for my guide mark, that's not going to show. For my guide mark, I'll just make a line. You can see I'm leaving enough space between the first one so that when I press out my icing, it's not going to press and connect to that. And if you do get too close, that's when you come in with your toothpick and draw between and draw back down to move and manipulate the icing. Same with here. When you get closer to the other one, you just want to make sure that you're releasing the pressure or pulling down before you touch that other arm on the next one, like right here. And you can see I just covered up that broken line. I'm wiping off the tip of my icing bag in between most each time. It's going to make sure that your piping comes out nice and clean without any extra clobs. And that one's a little close for me, so I'm just going to take my toothpick or scribe tool, and while the icing's wet, pull down and just give it some definition. And then I'm just going to pipe a nice big dot in the middle, but I'm actually using the tip of the icing bag to just kind of shape and move it around a bit. You can also do that with, you guessed it, your toothpick or needle tool. And you can see I can actually really move the icing around when it's wet. I'm just kind of picking it up. And kind of whipping it, swirling it a bit, just to get a round shape. You won't want to fuss with it too much, because that's when you're going to start letting it crust over as you're working with it and really kind of pulling off what you don't want. You can see I've done a larger dot there than there. I also have other details here that I'm not going to fit in here because I've done thicker arms. And I'm going to just see this. I don't like that. It's globbing up there a bit. And it's already crusting over, so I'm risking picking it up too much. When it starts crusting over, it's all going to lift. But I don't have enough room for those arms because I made these ones bigger than this one. And that's the beauty of snowflakes. They're all different. But you can go back in with other details. You can do dots. You can do whatever you want. And voila, a pretty snowflake. Now this will need to dry probably a good 8 hours before you stack them. If you have any edible glitter, I'm using one from Wilton. It's an edible food glitter. You can give that a little spray for some shimmer. You can get this at Bulk Barn actually generally. You can also get little vials of glitter dust, and you could just sprinkle a little bit of that on. And I just mucked my cookie right there. So if you muck your cookie before it's too dry, just go in, add a little bit of icing, and almost tap it out. Stitch it back together, the wet with the drying icing. Or you can take your toothpick and just carefully sort of cut a line and scrape that off and just redo the arm. But it's easier to just add a little bit and tap it down and stitch it together. It won't be perfect, but it'll still look good. Another technique that you can do for snowflakes is you can just do piped lines. Oops. Let's try that again. So you can scrape off your icing. I'm going to go from the top to the bottom. I'm going to move this one out of the way. Again, I'm doing this at a very funny angle and can't... Hopefully you guys won't have this same problem. This is just from me trying to do this from afar so that the camera can see it. But you can just do piped lines and any snowflake details you want. Now the more you cross over into the middle, the more height you're going to start layering, so just be careful. But you can do dots. And I would probably squeeze all dots first and then come back in if you have any peaks and just fix those. You can also just give it a minute and tap your finger, as long as your finger is nice and clean, tap your finger into a bit of powdered sugar or cornstarch and then tap those down. You can do I'm going to do arms. I think I always like the arms to make. And where there's connections that you don't like, you can actually do dots there. And you could just go around and repeat that. It's really whatever you want, but keeping it simple is best. All I'm doing is dots and lines and teardrops, and you can see it pulls together a really beautiful snowflake. It's when you try and do too much, or you're trying to pipe too specific of details, that you start hiccuping and running into errors. I forgot my dot here at the connection. But how simple is this? So you can do this. Everybody can do this. And the beautiful thing about snowflakes is no two are alike, so it doesn't matter how it looks, because when you put them all together, like if you don't like one, that's okay. Just put them all together and the whole collection will come together beautifully. So that's it. That's a quick and easy tutorial for piping icing, and you can use a Ziploc bag. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you return for some other videos. Sorry about the screaming kids. I have a school behind me and they're running out for lunch. Bye.